I never imagined that a moment could change how I viewed my life, my marriage, and myself. It was a humid Sunday afternoon. The air conditioning had stopped working upstairs, and I was bringing fresh towels to the guest bathroom where my 20-year-old stepson, Ethan, had been staying during college break. My husband, Tom, was working late again, something that had become far too regular. I knocked lightly, no answer. I assumed he had gone downstairs. The door creaked open. Steam curled out, fogging the mirror. Then I saw him, Ethan. In the bath, headphones in, eyes closed. I froze. I should have left. Walked out, shut the door, but I didn't. I stood there, towel in hand, mesmerized by how much he had grown. He wasn't a boy anymore, and I wasn't just his stepmother. Not really. Not emotionally. Not in the way people assumed. That moment woke something in me I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about attraction. It was about being seen, noticing, feeling alive again. Over the weeks, Ethan and I began to talk more, casual at first, about his classes, his plans, how he felt distanced from his dad. I understood too well. Tom had grown cold, mechanical, and emotionally absent long before Ethan came home. Somewhere along the way, Ethan and I became each other's emotional escape. One night, after a long, wine-filled talk on the patio, he brushed my hand. The way he looked at me, it wasn't confusion, it wasn't fear, it was knowing, and I didn't pull away. We kissed. Once, then again. That night, we crossed a line we couldn't uncross. It was never supposed to happen. I kept telling myself it was a one-time lapse, but it wasn't. It continued. Hidden glances, whispered apologies, desperate touches in shadows. I was torn between guilt and a strange, shameful sense of being wanted. Ethan filled the emotional void Tom had left gaping for years. I wasn't just betraying my husband. I was betraying myself. Eventually, it all came crashing down. Ethan confessed everything in a fit of guilt after returning to college. Tom didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just said, "I knew something was wrong. I didn't want to see it." The marriage ended quietly, no screaming, just silence, the truth. I don't regret feeling something again. But I do regret the way I let my loneliness lead me to destroy a family. Infidelity isn't always about lust. Sometimes it's about being emotionally starved and finding warmth in the most dangerous places. It started with the kind of silence that doesn't seem threatening at first. Just the usual absence between a married couple who have stopped talking about anything but groceries, bills, and errands. At first, it was explainable. Tom worked late. I kept busy with freelance writing projects and the constant upkeep of a home that no longer felt lived in. We weren't fighting, we weren't passionate, we were just surviving next to each other. But survival wasn't intimacy. It was routine dressed up in duty. I had gone months without being touched like someone who was wanted. When Ethan returned home from college for the summer, everything shifted, though it wasn't obvious at first. He was polite, warm, more emotionally present than his father had been in years. That's what caught me off guard. He noticed when I wore my hair differently. He laughed at my jokes. He sat beside me on the couch instead of disappearing into his room. It felt harmless, almost sweet. But that's where it starts, isn't it? Emotional starvation makes you grateful for crumbs. There's a different kind of loneliness that forms when you're with someone who stops seeing you. Tom used to look at me like he knew who I was, but now, even during dinner, we sat across from each other like co-workers who didn't share a department. Meanwhile, Ethan would tell me about the girl he dated briefly at school, how she liked old French films and smoked clove cigarettes. He wasn't bragging. He just wanted to be heard, and I pathetically, maybe, wanted to hear him. I wanted to feel useful to someone again, needed, relevant. One afternoon, he was in the backyard working out, shirtless in the heat. I was watering the garden. I looked at him, just for a moment longer than I should have, and when he caught my eye, he smiled without shame, no awkwardness, no judgment, and something in that smile cracked through the years of numbness I had been living in. I hated myself for noticing him, not as a stepson, but as a man. But I did notice, and pretending I didn't would have been a lie I couldn't carry. The emotional boundary had already been breached, quietly and invisibly, long before anything physical happened. It happened through looks held too long, through long conversations after midnight when Tom was asleep, and through mutual confessions that should never be shared between a stepmother and stepson. We talked about books, about music, about fears. But what we were really saying was, I feel invisible too. That kind of mutual vulnerability is dangerous, because it feels like intimacy. It feels like being loved. It feels like rescue. The night I walked in on him in the bathroom was an accident. I knocked, got no response, and opened the door assuming it was empty. He was in the bath, eyes closed, headphones in, a candle flickering on the counter beside him. I should have left. But something kept me rooted there, something wrong, but undeniably human. It wasn't desire, not at first. It was a mixture of curiosity, longing, and sadness. He looked peaceful in a way that I hadn't felt in years. I backed out slowly, but he saw me. Later, he would say, "You didn't have to leave. I didn't mind." And that sentence rewrote everything I thought was stable. That was the moment I realized the boundary wasn't just crossed. It had been dismantled, and the most frightening part was how natural it felt. It wasn't a thunderbolt, it wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, like an emotional drift that ends with you waking up miles from shore. I would lie in bed at night, next to a husband whose back was always turned, thinking about how Ethan had listened to my story about nearly publishing a novel 10 years ago, the one Tom had forgotten entirely. Or how he remembered that I liked lemon in my tea. These weren't big things, but they filled the cracks in my heart like water, seeking its level. And that's how it begins, not with a kiss or a touch, but with eye contact that lingers a few seconds too long, with laughter that sounds like affection, and with two people both quietly asking the same question neither dares say aloud. Do you see me? This wasn't about lust, not yet. This was about being noticed, about being needed, and when emotional connection takes root in forbidden places, it doesn't feel wrong. It feels like survival. The night after the bathroom incident, I couldn't sleep. Tom was snoring beside me, oblivious. The room felt like a cell, walls closing in, air too still, silence that pressed against my skin. My mind wasn't quiet anymore. It raced through flashes of what I saw, what I felt, and what I didn't expect to carry so heavily. I began noticing the details of our marriage like they were pieces of a set I'd lived on too long, props meant to trick the audience. The framed photo on the dresser hadn't been updated in 7 years. The hand towels were still from our wedding registry, and we hadn't made love in nearly 11 months. I counted. That wasn't an exaggeration. That was the ache of a woman who had been pretending she didn't miss being touched. The next morning, Tom made coffee and left it on the counter without a word, like he did every day. It was a habit, not a gesture. He didn't look me in the eye anymore, not really. He asked how I slept. I said fine. I didn't ask him the same. We were always polite, always functional. But function doesn't feel like love. It feels like a job, and I had been clocking in and out of this marriage like a tired employee for far too long. Ethan noticed the shift, of course he did. He always noticed. He started helping around the house more, cutting vegetables with me at dinner, offering to drive me to the market, hanging back in the evenings when Tom retreated to his office. We never said anything that could be held against us, but our silences began to feel louder than our words. I remember once, while slicing onions, our hands touched reaching for the same knife. It should have been nothing. But my breath caught. I turned away quickly. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The unraveling began not with a bang, but with softness. Ethan told me about a dream he had where I disappeared, and he couldn't find me in a crowd. I told him about how I used to write poems when I was 20, and how I burned them after Tom laughed at one I shared with him. He stared at me and said, I would have loved to read them. That kind of comment feels like nothing on paper. But when you've been deprived of tenderness, it feels like an earthquake in your chest. I knew the line had been crossed long before our lips ever met. That line was breached every time I chose to confide in Ethan instead of Tom. Every time Ethan asked me, "Are you okay?" And I said yes, but wanted to scream no. And he still heard the scream beneath the whisper. That's the kind of intimacy people don't talk about. It's emotional infidelity. And sometimes it's more devastating than the physical. The day we kissed, it rained. Tom had gone to a last-minute meeting and wouldn't be home until late. Ethan and I were watching an old movie in the living room. Something in black and white, something sad. I don't remember the title, I just remember how he looked at me like he was asking permission without saying a word. I could have stopped it. I should have, but my body moved before my conscience caught up. Our lips met like they had been waiting for it forever, and in that moment I didn't feel guilt. I felt seen, I felt real. The guilt came after, drenched in it, drenched in shame, drenched in panic, but the scariest part. I didn't want to undo it. I wanted to undo how I got there. I wanted to undo the years of being neglected, of telling myself that loyalty meant settling, that marriage meant sacrifice without return. I wanted to undo the life I had built on the assumption that emotional numbness was normal. After that, Tom began to notice small things. I was quieter, less reactive. He asked if I was depressed. I almost laughed. Depressed, no. I was finally feeling something, but I couldn't tell him that, so I blamed work stress, hormones, sleep issues, lies wrapped in truth, easier to swallow. Then one evening, Tom came into the kitchen and said, "He looks at you differently, you know." I dropped the plate I was holding. It shattered on the floor. He didn't flinch. "Ethan," he said, "he watches you like I used to. You haven't noticed." He left the room before I could respond. That was the beginning of the end. He didn't ask outright. He didn't accuse, he knew. Everything that had been quiet became deafening, and I realized the facade wasn't just cracked. It was crumbling, not because of Ethan, not even because of the kiss, but because Tom and I had already abandoned the relationship years before. The infidelity was just the final, unspoken truth we both had been too proud, or too tired, to say out loud.